Today I want to talk a little bit about voice, sometimes called narrative voice. And narrative voice is really all about perspective. It's all about perspective. Who is talking, how are they talking, and like who, from what viewpoint? Sometimes we say viewpoint. What viewpoint are they working from? There are three narrative voices that we're going to look at. The first person, second person, and the third person. Each has its own uses, and we're going to see that down below. So let's talk about the first person first. So let's talk about our first person. Well, who is the first person? Who is the most important person? Most people think it's themselves. And the first person, well, they would agree. You see how they have this little arrow pointing to their head. They're pointing to themselves. And so when the first person is talking, they're going to use words like I and me. Things like that. I and me. They're always the person they are talking about. They're talking from their own personal perspective, right? They would say something like, I am going to go get my bike. So we know that this is a first person talking because they're using I and my. They're talking from their own perspective. They are the person telling the story. I am going to get my bike. I am going to the store. Me, 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 me. So they're always talking about themselves. That's the first person. The second person, they are a little bit different. Second person, who's the second person? Well, it's you. Well, what do you mean it's you? Well, it's actually you, the person watching this video. You are the second person. You're the second person. And oftentimes you'll see the second person used for things like instructions. Right? So you might see something like this. Once you open the box, you need to check that all the parts are there. It's instructions. And so you can see here, you and you. And they're actually talking to you. That's you. I don't know if I've drawn you correctly. But they're speaking, the person, the narrator that is writing or speaking, they're talking directly to you. Teachers often will talk this way. When they're giving instructions to a class, they would say, you need to pull out your paper and pen. And it's really useful if you know who you are talking to. So we call that the audience. So if you're speaking directly to an individual person and you know who they are, then the second person voice is a really great voice to use. If you don't know who the person is, if you don't know who's going to be reading the document, I would avoid the second person because you don't know who they are. So you shouldn't be talking to them as if you do. Okay? The other thing the second person can be used to do is it can be kind of scary, like almost like a horror. I call it a horror voice, right? So you are walking down a dark, foggy street. Right? You look behind you. Right? So I'm making, when the author is, or the narrator is using the second person voice, it's kind of horrifying because you are walking down a dark, foggy street. You look behind you. It's not actually happening, but you are placing yourself, it's actually you who's in that story. So it can be used for kind of a scary effect. Now, the third person voice is the most common, I would say, in terms of when you're looking at a text, because it's going to be, the way to think of the third person is, so they're kind of down here, and I like to think of the narrator, he's kind of up in the clouds up here, and they're looking down on the person. So let's say this is Michael. Michael's the third person. So you might see something like this. Michael went to the store. Who's the third person? Michael. It doesn't say I went to the store. It says Michael went to the store. And so whenever you see the use of other pronouns, he, she, it, his, hers, you might just see, the name of the person. If their name is there, that's definitely a third person point of view. Another one you'll see they, right? That's also a third person. So if I said they went to their car, right? I know this is a third person voice because I'm seeing those pronouns like that. Pronouns are just words that stand in place for nouns, right? Or if I said, back to our friend Michael, I might say, Michael went to their car, which in that case, I'd switch it out for his. So that's a quick run through of the voices. The third person voice allows the narrator, the person telling the story, to tell it kind of objectively. We are outside of the person watching them make their way through the story. In the second person, it could be used for instructions or kind of a horror effect to make sure that the person reading it is actually the person who's in the story. And then back to the first person, I, me, and my. It's the story is being told from the perspective of the person telling it. I am going to get my bicycle. So that's a quick run through of the voices. Know how to recognize them when you're reading a text, and then know when to use them. If you're writing from your own personal perspective with your own personal opinions, use the first person. If you're giving instructions, or you know who you're writing to exactly, you know them by name, like you're writing a letter to them, or you know that they are the person who's maybe going to be using one of your products or something like that. If you're at a store and you're writing instructions for how to use a product, you would use the second person. And if you don't know if who you're writing to, or if you're just telling a story from outside, I call it outside perspective, very common, use that third person voice. Hopefully that's useful in breaking down the three narrative voices that we make use of.